The broken Promise hung in low orbit over Centauri Prime, its recently repaired hull still bearing the scars of yesterday's brutal engagement. Hack's paws moved carefully over his console, running diagnostics on their patched-up systems. "How were we looking?" Jeb asked, his voice carrying a hint of concern. Hack's whiskers twitched as he analyzed the data. "All critical systems are operational, Captain, but we're not at 100%. The hull integrity is holding at 89%, and there are still some power fluctuations in the starboard engine." Killian chimed in from his station. "Weapons are online, but I wouldn't push them too hard. Those repair crews did their best, but we're still held together with spit and prayers in some places." Jeb nodded grimly. "Understood. We'll take it easy for now. No heroics today, people." A gruff voice came from behind them. Sergeant Dax, leader of the Marine squad now assigned to their ship. "With all due respect, Captain, taking it easy isn't really an option in the middle of an invasion." "Noted," Sergeant Jeb replied, "but I'd rather bring this ship and crew back in one piece. We'll do our part, but we're not pushing our luck." As they descended into Centauri Prime's atmosphere, Hack couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The sky was thick with smoke and the flashes of ongoing battles. Their mission was supposed to be simple: provide air support for ground troops advancing on a key Imperial stronghold. "Multiple contacts on approach," Hack reported, his ears swiveling to catch every sound. "Looks like a squadron of Wasp interceptors, bearing 047. Jeb's hands tightened on the controls. "Evasive maneuvers. Killian, give them something to think about, but don't overdo it." The broken Promise banked hard, its movements not quite as smooth as usual. Hack could feel the strain on the hull as Killian returned fire, forcing the interceptors to break formation. As they wove through the chaos of battle, Hack was acutely aware of every shudder, every groan of the ship's frame. They were flying on the edge, balancing the need to fight with the need to preserve their battered vessel. Suddenly, a massive shape loomed through the smoke ahead of them. Hack's blood ran cold as he recognized it: an Imperial Titan-class AA gun, its massive barrel already tracking their approach. Captain Hack cried out, but his warning came a split second too late. The world seemed to slow down as the AA gun fired, its enormous round hurtling straight towards them. In that moment, Hack knew that all their caution, all their attempts to take it easy had been in vain. Time seemed to stand still as the massive round from the Titan-class AA gun hurtled towards the broken Promise. Jeb's reflexes, honed by years of racing and combat, kicked in instantly. He wrenched the controls, sending the ship into a desperate evasive maneuver. But it wasn't enough. The round slammed into the broken Promise with devastating force, punching through the already weakened hull like it was paper. Hack felt the ship lurch sickeningly as the projectile tore through, exiting through the cockpit in a shower of sparks and debris. Alarms blared, red emergency lights bathing the bridge in an eerie glow. Hack's paws flew over his console, trying to make sense of the damage reports flooding his screen. Hull breach. Multiple systems failing. Hack shouted over the cacophony of alarms and groaning metal. "We're losing power fast." Jeb's voice cut through the chaos, steady despite the dire situation. "Killian, seal off the breach sections. Sergeant Dax, get your Marines ready for emergency evac." The ship began to plummet, smoke trailing from the gaping holes in its hull. Hack watched in horror as the ground rushed up to meet them, buildings and streets growing alarmingly large in the view screen. "Brace for impact," Jeb yelled, his hands a blur over the controls as he fought to keep the broken Promise level. Hack closed his eyes, gripping his station tightly. He could hear the Marines in the back, their armor clanking as they secured themselves for the impending crash. The impact, when it came, was less catastrophic than Hack had feared. Jeb's masterful piloting had turned what should have been a fatal crash into a controlled descent. The broken Promise skidded across what Hack realized was a park, tearing up grass and trees before finally grinding to a halt. For a moment, there was only the hiss of ruptured systems and the distant sound of battle. Then, Jeb's voice broke the silence. "Status report. Is everyone all right?" A chorus of groans and affirmatives followed. Miraculously, it seemed no one had been killed by the direct hit or the subsequent crash. Sergeant Dax's gruff voice came from the back. "Marines are shaken but operational, Captain. But we need to move. This wreck is a beacon for every imp in the area." Hack looked at his console, most of its displays now dark or flickering. "Captain, I'm picking up Imperial chatter. They've pinpointed our location and are converging on our position." Jeb nodded grimly, unstrapping himself from the pilot's seat. "All right, people, grab whatever weapons and supplies you can carry. We're abandoning ship." As Hack gathered his gear, checking the charge on his blaster and ensuring his armor was secure, he cast a last, longing look at the bridge of the Broken Promise. This ship had been their home, their lifeline, through so many harrowing adventures. The crew of the Broken Promise and their Marine escort emerged from the smoking wreckage, weapons at the ready. Hack's sensitive ears twitched, picking up the distant sound of Imperial vehicles approaching. "We need to move," now Jeb ordered, his voice low but commanding. "Sergeant Dax, take point. Hacked, use that keen hearing of yours to watch our six." They moved swiftly across the park, the lush grass a stark contrast to the chaos of battle surrounding them. Hack's paws gripped his blaster tightly, his racing reflexes now focused on survival rather than speed. There Killian growled, pointing to a large building at the edge of the park. "Looks like some kind of civic center. Might offer some cover and a defensible position." Jeb nodded. "Good eye. Let's move." As they sprinted towards the building, the whine of Imperial speeder bikes filled the air. Hack's fur stood on end as he called out, "Incoming, 3 o'clock." The Marines reacted instantly, dropping to defensive positions and opening fire. Hack marveled at their coordination and precision. These weren't the inexperienced troops they'd faced before. "Keep moving," Sergeant Dax shouted, providing covering fire as the rest of the group made for the building's entrance. Hack's heart pounded as energy bolts sizzled past him. He'd been in dangerous situations before, but being on the ground exposed was a whole new level of terror. They reached the building's entrance, Killian quickly bypassing the lock. As they piled inside, Jeb and Dax took up positions by the windows, returning fire at the advancing Imperials. "We've got more company," Hack reported, his ears swiveling to catch the new sounds. "Sounds like a full squad, approaching from the north." Jeb's face was grim as he assessed their situation. "We're outnumbered and outgunned. We need to find a way to even the odds." Sergeant Dax grinned, a fierce light in his eyes. "Leave that to us, Captain. Marines, prepare for close quarters combat. Let's show these imps what we're made of." The next few minutes were a blur of intense fighting. The Imperials breached the building, but the narrow corridors played to the defenders' advantage. Hack found himself in the thick of it, his small size and quick reflexes allowing him to dart between cover, taking shots that caught the enemy by surprise. Killian was a force of nature, his years of combat experience evident in every move he made. Jeb coordinated their defense masterfully, calling out enemy positions and orchestrating their counterattacks. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the last of the Imperial soldiers fell back, retreating to regroup. "That won't hold them for long," Dax said, checking his weapon. "We need to find a more secure position and try to contact our forces for extraction." As Jeb began to formulate a plan, Hack's sensitive ears picked up something that made his blood run cold. He gestured for silence, straining to hear the conversation of the retreating Imperials. What he heard next would change everything, turning their desperate fight for survival into something far more dangerous. Hack's whiskers twitched nervously as he relayed what he'd overheard to the group. "Captain, the Imperials, they know who we are. They're reporting our location and specifically mentioning that we're X-racers." Jeb's face hardened. "Did they mention the Broken Promise by name?" Hack nodded grimly. "Yes, sir. They seemed particularly excited about that." Killian cursed under his breath. "Well, that's just perfect. We've gone from being random enemies to high-value targets." Sergeant Dax looked confused. "I don't understand. Why does it matter that you're X-racers?" Jeb's eyes were dark as he explained. The Empire has put a special bounty on X-Racers. We're symbols of resistance, living proof that their system can be beaten. And the crew of the Broken Promise, we're at the top of their most wanted list." The implications sank in, a heavy silence falling over the group. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were now the prime targets of every Imperial force on Centauri Prime. "We need to move," Jeb decided, his voice filled with urgency. "If they've identified us, they'll be throwing everything they have at this location." As if to emphasize his point, the distant rumble of heavy vehicles could be heard approaching. Sergeant Jeb turned to Dax. "Can you get through to our forces? We need extraction, and we need it now." Dax fiddled with his comm unit, his face growing more frustrated by the second. "Negative, Captain. The imps are jamming all frequencies. I can't get a clear signal out." Dax's ears drooped as he realized the gravity of their situation. They were cut off, outnumbered, and now marked for special attention by the enemy. "All right, listen up," Jeb gathered the group close. "We're in a tough spot, but we've been through worse. We need to stay mobile, avoid detection, and find a way to break through that jamming. Hacked, I need you to keep those ears of yours open for any Imperial chatter that might help us. Killian, you and the Marines will handle our defense. I'll work on finding us a path out of here." As they prepared to move out, checking weapons and distributing what little supplies they had, Hack couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and determination. They were in the fight of their lives, hunted by an enemy that knew exactly who they were and what they represented. But as he looked around at his crewmates and their Marine allies, he saw the same fierce resolve in their eyes. They had defied the odds before, turning a death sentence into a chance at freedom. Now, deep behind enemy lines and marked for death, they would have to do it again. The group moved silently through the war-torn streets of Centauri Prime, ducking from cover to cover. Hack's ears swiveled constantly, alert for any sign of approaching danger. They had managed to slip away from the Civic Center just as Imperial forces began to converge on it, but they knew it was only a matter of time before they were spotted again. As they paused in the shadow of a bombed-out building, Sergeant Dax fiddled with his comm unit once more. His face lit up momentarily as he managed to catch a weak signal. "This is Sergeant Dax of the 5th Marine Division, requesting immediate extraction for high-value Allied personnel," he whispered urgently into the comm. The response, when it came, was broken and filled with static, but the message was clear enough to send a chill down Hack's spine. Negative on extraction. Heavy enemy presence. 1 week minimum before. Push through. Dax's face fell as he relayed the message to the group. "Command says they can't get to us. The Imperial defenses are too strong. It'll be at least a week before they can push through to our position." A heavy silence fell over the group as the reality of their situation sank in. They were on their own, deep in enemy territory, with a massive bounty on their heads. Jeb's jaw clenched, but his voice remained steady as he addressed the team. "All right, people, we knew this wasn't going to be easy. We've got a week to survive in hostile territory. Any ideas?" Killian was the first to speak up. "We need to find a secure location, somewhere we can defend if necessary but also stay hidden, preferably with access to supplies." One of the Marines, a young woman named Torres, chimed in. "There's an old industrial district about 2 clicks east of here. Lots of abandoned factories and warehouses. Might be a good place to lay low." Hack nodded in agreement. "Those kinds of places usually have emergency supplies too. Might help us stretch our rations." Jeb considered for a moment, then nodded. "Good thinking. We'll head for the industrial district. But we need to be careful. The Imperials will be expecting us to go to ground. They'll be searching every nook and cranny." As they prepared to move out, Hack couldn't help but feel a mix of dread and determination. A week was a long time to survive in enemy territory, especially with the entire Imperial force hunting for them. But as he looked at his crewmates and their Marine allies, he saw the same fierce resolve in their eyes. They had overcome impossible odds before, and they would do it again. "Remember," Jeb said as they set off towards the industrial district, "we're not just fighting for our own survival now. We're a symbol of resistance. Every day we evade capture is another blow to the Empire's morale. Let's show them what the crew of the Broken Promise is really made of." With those words ringing in their ears, the group melted into the shadows of Centauri Prime's war-torn streets. The longest week of their lives had begun, and the race for survival was on. 3 days had passed since their crash landing, and the crew of the Broken Promise, along with their marine escorts, had settled into a grim routine of survival in the abandoned industrial district. Their current hideout was a derelict factory, its cavernous interior providing both shelter and a maze-like defense against potential intruders. Hacked crouched by a broken window, his sensitive ears twitching at every sound. The streets below were eerily quiet, but he knew better than to let his guard down. Imperial patrols had been growing more frequent and aggressive with each passing day. Jeb's voice was low as he approached, his armor scuffed and dirty from days of constant vigilance. Hacked shook his head. "Nothing yet, Captain, but they're out there. I can feel it." As if on cue, the distant rumble of vehicles reached their ears. Jeb's hand went to his weapon, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. "Multiple contacts," Hacked reported, his whiskers quivering. "Sounds like a full platoon with mechanized support. They're doing a sweep of the area." Jeb nodded grimly. "All right, let's hope our precautions hold. Killian, Dax, get everyone to battle stations. Quiet and careful." The next hour was a tense game of cat and mouse. The Imperial forces methodically searched building after building, drawing ever closer to their hideout. Hack's heart pounded as he listened to the soldiers' movements, relaying their positions to Jeb in hushed whispers. Just when it seemed they might avoid detection, disaster struck. A young Marine, repositioning for a better vantage point, knocked over a pile of debris. The clatter echoed through the empty factory. Contact, an Imperial voice shouted from outside. "Building D7, multiple signatures." What followed was a chaotic firefight. The crew of the Broken Promise and their Marine allies used their knowledge of the factory's layout to their advantage, setting up crossfires and ambush points. Hacked found himself in the thick of it, his small size allowing him to move between positions undetected, calling out enemy movements. Killian was a force of nature, his expert marksmanship dropping Imperial soldiers with terrifying efficiency. Jeb coordinated their defense masterfully, anticipating the enemy's moves and countering them before they could gain any ground. But the Imperials had numbers on their side, and they were pressing their advantage hard. As the battle wore on, Hacked could see their defenses beginning to crumble. "We can't hold them much longer," Sergeant Dax shouted over the din of battle. "We need an exit strategy." Jeb's mind raced, considering and discarding options in split seconds. Then, his eyes lit up with a dangerous glint that Hacked recognized from their most daring races. "Hacked," he called out. "Remember that maintenance tunnel we found yesterday? The one that leads to the sewers?" Hacked nodded, suddenly understanding Jeb's plan. It was risky, but it was their only shot. "All right, people," Jeb's voice carried over the chaos. "Fall back to Point Charlie. We're taking the express route out of here." As they began their fighting retreat towards the hidden tunnel, Hacked couldn't help but marvel at how their racing experience translated to urban warfare. The quick thinking, the split-second decisions, the ability to find paths where none seemed to exist, it was all coming into play now, with their lives on the line. They might be outnumbered and outgunned, but the crew of the Broken Promise was far from beaten. As they disappeared into the depths of Centauri Prime's undercity, leaving frustrated Imperial forces in their wake, Hacked allowed himself a small smile. 5 days into their ordeal, the crew of the Broken Promise and their Marine allies had become a well-oiled machine of survival and resistance. Their latest hideout was an abandoned subway station deep beneath Centauri Prime's surface, a maze of tunnels and maintenance rooms that provided both shelter and escape routes. Hacked sat cross-legged on the floor, his nimble paws working to modify a handful of comm units they'd scavenged from disabled Imperial patrols. His racing experience with fine-tuning delicate machinery was proving invaluable in their current situation. "How's it coming?" Furball Killian asked, checking the charge on his makeshift energy cell. The weapons officer had rigged up an impressive array of jury-rigged weapons and traps using salvaged parts and his encyclopedic knowledge of weaponry. Almost there, Hack replied, his whiskers twitching in concentration. If this works, we should be able to listen in on Imperial communications without them detecting us. Jeb approached, looking over their handiwork with approval. Good work, both of you. We may be outgunned, but we're certainly not outthought. Their conversation was interrupted by Sergeant Dax returning from a scouting mission with 2 of his Marines. Captain, we've got a situation topside. The Imperials are setting up a major command post in the central plaza. Looks like they're consolidating their forces for a final sweep of the area. Jeb's face hardened as he considered this new information. They're getting desperate. They know we're still out here, and it's making them look bad. So what's the play? Cap Killian asked, a glint of excitement in his eyes. We going to sit tight and wait them out? Jeb shook his head, a familiar smile playing at the corners of his mouth, the same smile Hack had seen before their most daring racing maneuvers. No, we're going to hit them where it hurts. If they want to consolidate, we'll make them regret it. As Jeb outlined his plan, Hack felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. It was audacious, borderline insane, and exactly the kind of thinking that had made them the most successful racing crew in the galaxy. The next few hours were a flurry of activity. Hack and Killian worked to modify their scavenged equipment into makeshift explosives and signal disruptors. The Marines, under Dax's guidance, plotted approach vectors and escape routes through the city's underground network. As night fell on the surface, the team moved out. They split into 3 groups, each targeting a different part of the Imperial command post. Hack found himself with Jeb and 2 Marines, tasked with planting disruptors on the enemy's communication array. Moving through the shadows of Centauri Prime's war-torn streets, Hack was struck by how much this felt like one of their old races: the adrenaline, the split-second decisions, the perfect coordination between team members. Only now, the stakes were higher than ever before. Their attack, when it came, was swift and devastating. Explosions rocked the Imperial position, sowing chaos and confusion. Hack's team successfully sabotaged the comm array, leaving the enemy forces blind and disorganized. As they melted back into the night, the sounds of Imperial panic filling the air, Hack couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They might be outnumbered and on the run, but they were far from beaten. The crew of the Broken Promise was writing a new chapter in their legend, turning their racing skills into weapons of resistance. And as they regrouped in their underground haven, planning their next move, Hack knew that the Empire had no idea what they were truly up against. Day 6 dawned. Though deep in their underground hideout, the crew of the Broken Promise could only guess at the passage of time. The air was thick with tension and the acrid smell of overworked power cells. Their supplies, carefully rationed from the beginning, were running dangerously low. Hack sat in a quiet corner, his sensitive ears constantly alert for any sign of approaching danger. He was tinkering with their last functional comm unit, trying to boost its signal strength enough to break through the Imperial jamming. "Any luck?" Jeb asked, his voice low and weary. The constant vigilance and stress of their situation was taking its toll on all of them. Hack's whiskers drooped slightly. "Not yet, Captain. But I'm not giving up." Jeb nodded, placing a reassuring hand on Hack's shoulder. "I know you won't. None of us will." As the day wore on, the team gathered for a strategy session. Their successful raid on the Imperial command post had bought them some breathing room, but they knew it was only temporary. "We've got enough supplies for maybe another day, 2 if we really stretch it," Sergeant Dax reported grimly. After that. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew the stakes. Killian, ever the pragmatist, spoke up. "We could try for another raid. There's an Imperial supply depot not far from here." Jeb shook his head. "Too risky. They'll be expecting something like that after our last hit. We need to lay low, conserve our strength." As they debated their options, Hack found his mind wandering to their journey so far. From condemned prisoners forced to race for others' entertainment, to freedom fighters striking blows against an empire. It seemed almost unreal. "You know," Hack said, surprising himself by speaking up, "I never thought I'd say this, but part of me almost misses the races." The others looked at him in surprise, but then Killian chuckled. I know what you mean, furball. At least then we knew who our enemies were and where the finish line was. Jeb smiled, a rare sight in recent days. We're still racing, in a way. Only now, we're racing against time, against the Empire, against our own limitations. His words seemed to rejuvenate the group. They spent the next few hours sharing stories of their most daring races, their narrowest escapes. Even the Marines joined in, fascinated by the tales of the infamous racing crew they'd been protecting. As night fell on the surface, Hack returned to his work on the comm unit with renewed determination. Their reminiscing had reminded him of something important. No matter how dire the situation, the crew of the Broken Promise always found a way to pull through. Just as he was about to call it quits for the night, the comm unit crackled to life. Through the static, a faint voice could be heard. Julius 9 forces. Advancing on all fronts. ETA to Sector 7. 12 hours. Hack's eyes widened as he realized what he was hearing. He called out to the others, his voice filled with excitement. Captain, I've done it. I'm picking up a transmission from our forces. As the team gathered around, hope shining in their eyes for the first time in days, Hack knew that their long wait was nearly over. The finish line was in sight, and true to form, the crew of the Broken Promise was going to cross it against all odds. The next 12 hours were a blur of tense anticipation and careful preparation. Hack's ears were practically glued to the jury-rigged comm unit, relaying every scrap of information he could glean from the intermittent transmissions breaking through the Imperial jamming. Julius 9 forces are pushing hard, Hack reported, his whiskers twitching with excitement. They're breaking through the Imperial line sector by sector. Jeb nodded, his face set with determination. All right, people, this is it. We need to be ready to move the moment our window opens. The team worked tirelessly, checking weapons, distributing what little supplies remained, and memorizing the route to their designated extraction point. Sergeant Dax and his Marines drilled on urban combat maneuvers, preparing for the inevitable firefight they'd face on their way out. As the hour of their planned breakout approached, Hack felt a familiar mix of fear and exhilaration. It was the same feeling he used to get before a particularly dangerous race, only amplified 100-fold. 5 minutes, Jeb announced, his voice steady despite the tension. Remember, we move fast, we move quiet, and we stick together. Just like threading the needle in the Nax asteroid belt, right, Hack? Hack nodded, appreciating the captain's attempt to lighten the mood with a reference to one of their most challenging races. The moment they emerged from their underground haven, chaos erupted. The streets of Centauri Prime were a war zone, with Julius 9 forces pushing hard against the crumbling Imperial defenses. The air was thick with smoke and the sound of energy weapons. Move, 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 Jeb shouted, leading the charge towards their extraction point. They weaved through debris-strewn streets, narrowly avoiding Imperial patrols in disarray. Hack's keen hearing proved invaluable, alerting the team to danger before it could materialize. Just as they thought they might make it without a fight, a squad of Imperial troops rounded a corner, blocking their path. Contact front, Killian roared, opening fire. The ensuing firefight was intense but brief. The crew of the Broken Promise and their Marine allies, hardened by a week of guerrilla warfare, made short work of the Imperial troops. As they approached the extraction point, the welcome sight of Julius 9 dropships descending from the smoke-filled sky greeted them. But between them and safety was a gauntlet of Imperial heavy weapons. "We're cut off," Sergeant Dax shouted over the din of battle. Jeb's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. Then, with a grin that Hack recognized from their most daring races, he said, "Not yet, we're not. Hacked, remember that maneuver we pulled in the Vortex run?" Hack's eyes widened as he realized what Jeb was suggesting. It was insane, borderline suicidal, but it just might work. What followed was a masterclass in the application of racing tactics to urban warfare. Using debris as cover, the team executed a series of coordinated maneuvers that left the Imperial forces confused and off balance. They created openings where none existed, used crossfire to their advantage, and ultimately broke through the enemy lines. As they sprinted the final stretch to the waiting dropships, Hack couldn't help but laugh. They had done it. Against all odds, They had survived a week behind enemy lines and were about to make their grand escape. The moment they boarded the dropship, exhausted but triumphant, Hack knew that this was a race they would never forget. As they lifted off, leaving the chaos of Centauri Prime behind, he caught sight of another ship approaching a recovery vessel, its tractor beam locked onto the battered remains of the broken Promise. Jeb smiled, noticing Hack's gaze. "Don't worry, old friend. We'll have her flying again in no time. After all, we've got plenty more races to win." As the dropship accelerated towards the safety of the Julius 9 fleet, Hack felt a surge of pride. They had faced their greatest challenge yet and emerged victorious. The legend of the Broken Promise and her crew had grown once again, and Hack knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just as they always had. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you loved it. Please remember to subscribe if you did like it so you can see more videos like this. And please give us a like and a comment too. I'll see you in the next one.